Good evening. Dr. White told me that I could just say she's kind of a big deal and that would be enough, but I have her bio up, so I will read it to you. Dr. Cheryl White is a professor of history at Louisiana State University of Shreveport, where she holds the endowed Hubert Humphreys Professorship. She currently serves on the board of directors of the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association and has published original research from the Vatican's secret archives on the history of the Shroud for international journals and conferences. Dr. White served as the historical consultant on the original Shroud of Turin exhibit developed for Museum of the Bible and as a lecturer for the Smithsonian Institute. In 2023, she presented on the topic of the Shroud of Turin at World Youth Day in Lisbon, Portugal, and at the 2024 National Eucharistic Congress. She co-hosts a 36-episode podcast entitled Who is the Man of the Shroud? Dr. White is a regular consultant and contributor to the History Channel. Take that. She features in a forthcoming documentary on the Shroud of Turin for EWTN and works closely with the Center for the International Study of the Shroud of Turin on collaborative projects. With Father Peter Mangum? I knew, I wanted to make sure you did. Dr. White curates the esteemed Richard Orario collection related to the history of the Shroud of Turin, a cultural treasure of artworks and documents that spans 5 centuries. Her forthcoming book, The Shroud in the Third Millennium, Confronting the Limits of Human Knowledge, will be published in 2025. And just on a personal note, I heard this once before, and I'm back to hear it again, so it is fantastic. So please welcome Dr. Cheryl White.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Father, for that great introduction. Look at how many of you came tonight. This is wonderful. It's great to see so many of you here. I need to begin by asking, just to kind of get a sense of my audience, how many of you know a little bit about the Shroud? Ooh, okay. How many of you know a lot about it? Okay, any of you think you can get up here and do this? I'll go sit down. I always like to know what I'm dealing with. Okay, I always like to know what I'm dealing with. I want to begin by telling you just a tiny little quick story about my personal journey with the Shroud. I think that it will help frame much of what I have to say to you tonight, if you know a little bit about my personal background. I was unchurched as a child, actually unchurched, completely unchurched. And at the age of 18, my first act of adult rebellion was to enter weekly catechesis with the Dominican and get baptized. And that began actually not just coincided with my college career, first as an undergraduate history major, later as a graduate student, obviously. But during the early to mid-1980s, the very first peer-reviewed science about this cloth began to be published in academic journals around the world. And I was pulled into this story, and it's never turned me loose. It was, remember, the mid-1980s. I was a new Catholic. Pope St. John Paul II was Pope, and I thought he was a rock star. And this cloth was making international headlines around the world. All this new science that pointed to this mysterious image that no one could explain. And then in 1988, the carbon-14 dating results were published that said that the cloth could be no older than the year 1260. Some of you might know this already. And at that point in time, many people stepped back. Certainly the scientific community stepped back. And I will tell you that it cost us an entire generation of opportunity to teach using this cloth based on what we know now was flawed science. So that's part, obviously I don't want to jump too far ahead in my presentation. I actually deal with that particular controversy now, quite frankly, actually, more honestly than I think I used to in the past. So that's kind of my story with it. It never turned me loose, and I've been given these incredible opportunities to teach about this around the world to lots of different groups, to lots of different people, and it is a very exciting time to be involved in Shroud studies. I dare say there is more interest in the Shroud now than there has been probably in the last 40 years. So look around you and see. There's obviously a lot of evidence. There's a lot of curiosity about this. So for those of you that know a little bit or maybe don't know a lot, what I always begin with is a very basic introduction to what we're talking about. First of all, to orient you to the image itself, and then I'll begin to explore factually what we know about it. I like to preface everything by telling you that what I share with you, we in the Shroud, sort of the Shroud community, Shroud scholarship community, would say is category 1, sometimes category 2 evidence. So there's 4 categories, right, that we kind of generally classify things according to. And if it's category 1 evidence, there's a very broad consensus about the scientific and empirical methods brought to bear on this particular piece of information I'm going to give you. If I'm saying something speculative or something that's not yet been peer reviewed, I'm going to tell you that, okay? Because there is some brand new emerging information that is very exciting, but it has not yet been fully peer reviewed. Am I going to share that with you tonight? You betcha. Because it's thrilling, and it's actually pointing, of course, us toward a more solid answer to a question that, of course, everyone has. So yes, that's to preface that by telling you that everything I'm going to share with you, unless I say otherwise, there is broad general scientific consensus on, okay? Everybody got the ground rules? Save up your questions. I do hope to leave time for that at the end. Some of the best stuff actually comes out in the questions. So for those of you that don't know anything about this cloth, we're going to begin there. We're talking about a 14.5-foot strip of linen. That's what it looks like to the naked eye, by the way. If you were to go to Turin, Italy to see it today, this is what you would see. This is what pilgrims have seen for centuries. But long before photography, long before we had sophisticated imaging, this is what you would see. Everybody can make out, I guess, the face of a man right here, yes? This is what we call the frontal image that runs here to the left. That's the back of the head, the dorsal part of the body running this direction. Now, I'm going to explain and orient you to the image in just a moment, but the reason that we are interested in this linen, of course, is the image. Yeah? We're not interested in it because it's a pretty old piece of linen. We're interested in it because it bears a forensically accurate, and this is important, a forensically accurate and anatomically perfect image of a man who has been scourged and crucified. What would you like to do to my mic? Watch it, it's going to fall apart. And it's Father's fault. He's the one that fixed it. Okay. All right. How's that? Is that better? Is it better with everybody? Okay. It bears the forensically accurate and anatomically perfect image of a man, about 5 foot 10 inches tall, weighed about 160, 165 pounds, who has been scourged and crucified in Roman fashion. He has a wound in his right side, right between the 5th and 6th ribs in the thoracic cavity, and this man has been capped on his head with something thorny that caused multiple puncture wounds on the top of the head, the nape of the neck. You get the picture. Okay, so I often joke about it this way. This is the image that draws us in. There is literally no one else in history who bears these unique wounds other than one person we know of. So it's not as if anyone would ever look at this image and say, oh, this man has been scourged and crucified and he's been capped with thorns and pierced in the right side with a Roman lance. I wonder who that's supposed to be. Right? So that's what pulls us in, is the image itself. It's the image. And the challenge with this, we have a great philosophical challenge. I'm going to lay out right up front. This is what my forthcoming book is about, and that's actually the only commercial. No, that might be the first commercial that you're going to hear tonight. It might not be the only one. But this is really something that's very interesting to me from a philosophical standpoint is, think about it. How man knows things, the more that we study things that man has created, they begin to give up their secrets to us, yeah? If man creates something, man can recreate. Man can dissemble what man has assembled, okay? Objects of the material world always give up their secrets. But yet the inverse of that seems to be true in almost every aspect of Shroud studies today. The more we study this, the more questions we are left with. Every question is answered by 2 or 3 brand new questions that we didn't even know to have. So we are continually pulled more, and it's like walking down an endless hallway, opening a door because you have an answer and looking ahead of you and there's another door. Yeah? So philosophically, that's a challenge because it's actually, we think, I can't quantify this, but I can qualify it, probably been subjected to more academic examination from every single discipline you can think of, especially the hard sciences, than any other thing, any other artifact in the world I know to exist. And yet, it remains a great mystery to us, a mystery. Now I want to plant that word with you. We're going to come back to that word, mystery. I'm going to come back to that word. Okay, again, so I said there's the image again. Now, one of the things that we realized when we were working on the Museum of the Bible exhibit in Washington, D.C., we watched on a soft opening preliminarily, people would have difficulty orienting themselves to the image itself. Like, okay, you're looking at it and you say, all right, there's this half of the body, half of the man is running this direction, the other half is, and it's on the same side of the cloth. How is that even possible? People couldn't really understand how that image could be oriented that way on the linen. So we developed a very simple animation, which I hope you will find helpful. I think it does help most people see this. Let me know if I'm in your way. Can everybody see that? All right. Is that helpful? Does everybody understand that this man would have been laid on one half of the linen and the other half of the linen wrapped over the top of the body? So that when you open that linen, now you have a frontal image on one side and the dorsal on the other, but on the same side of the cloth. Is that helpful? Okay. So, where did it come from? Who created it? And what can we know about it historically, scientifically, forensically? And those are really the things that we want to deal with tonight, are these major questions we have. Now, you have to know that because you have a history professor with you tonight that you're going to get a history lesson. Yes? You have to know that. But this is important context because anything that I tell you about what we know scientifically and now in the 21st century, forensically, CSI level stuff, admission in a court of law kind of stuff, kind of evidence, then the historical context takes on all the more importance. This cloth enters the documented history in the middle of the 14th century. It does. So am I telling you, therefore, that it didn't exist before the 14th century? No. I'm telling you it enters an undisputed, documented timeline in the middle of the 14th century. I have a very good idea of where it was long before then, but that might be for another time. We'll see if we have time to talk about that. But it enters the documented history in the middle of the 14th century, meaning that all historians agree on this. I can tell you where it has been every day from today, reaching all the way back to the middle of the 14th century. We know where it's been every day. It shows up in Lille, France, in the middle of the 14th century in the possession of a knight named Geoffrey de Charny. We do not know how this knight came to possess this linen cloth that he claimed to be the burial cloth of Christ. We don't know how he came to have it, but he built a church, magnificent church, put it on display as the burial linen, and we know that pilgrims made pilgrimages there to venerate it. The de Charny family owned it until 1453, and they transferred the ownership to the royal house of Savoy, a minor dynastic family of Europe that ultimately produced the titular kings of Italy, the last of whom was Umberto II, who died in 1983. The House of Savoy owned this cloth from 1453 until 1983. Does everybody hear that? That's hugely important because we have a great historical chain of custody We know where it was all of those centuries. We know it was very lovingly cared for, even though it was in a fire. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's a little unfortunate. It was in a fire while they owned it. But so the Shroud has only had three, in its documented history, three owners. The de Charny family, the House of Savoy, and in 1983, when King Umberto II died, he willed it to the living Pope, who was Pope St. John Paul II, as an individual, not the institutional Catholic Church. The Pope, as an individual, owns it. Today, the owner is Pope Francis. And when he dies, the next Pope will become the owner, the sole owner of this cloth. The other stipulation was that it would never leave Turin, which is why today it is in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist there, where it has been since the early 16th century. Actually, late 16th century. I'll tell you that date in a moment. Okay, so the next thing I want to tell you about is this fire. I told you it was an unfortunate fire. So the Savoy family owned a modest little estate in Chambéry in France. This is their humble little chapel that's on the grounds of their chateau there. And in the chapel is where they stored this precious linen. Folded into a metal reliquary, they placed it in a niche in the wall behind the altar. And there was a fire that broke out in this chapel in 1532. The Franciscan community there were caring for the cloth, caring for the chapel, rushed in, rescued the linen, but not before that metal reliquary had heated up and left what you see here, the parallel set of scorch marks, everybody see those? That run the entire length of the linen. The Poor Clares, the sister order to the Franciscans there in Chambéry, undertook a very loving repair and restoration of this cloth in 1534. And I need to point out some important things to you. Everybody notice the triangular shaped patches that are on there. Those were sewed on in 1534 by the Poor Clares. They're no longer there, by the way. Those were removed in 2002 as part of a restoration by the Archbishop of Turin. So now today, if you see the shroud, those are just holes. There's no patches there anymore. They sewed those patches on. They sewed a backing cloth on that linen. And we know now they also did something else that's kind of important. They introduced new cotton fibers into the linen to strengthen it. And they did this in really two places we know of, in the upper corners, but especially the top left corner. We know that they introduced large amounts of new fiber into the linen and did it in a very sophisticated, intricate reweave that is barely visible to the naked eye, and it was actually only under extreme imaging that you can see the difference. And here's what else, this else we know. We didn't know about ultraviolet light, by the way, until the middle of the 20th century. And in the 20th century, the first time that someone looked at the shroud under ultraviolet light, we noticed something very dramatic. If you look at it that way, what you see is a homogeneous sepia tone, like that beige color, straw color you're looking at. The whole shroud is that color except for the top left corner, which is a bright neon green. Now, that's a fair question to ask, isn't it? Why might that be? Clearly, there's something chemically different going on with that corner of the linen than the rest of the cloth. So, if you were my 8 a.m. college freshman, I would say to you, did you just write that down? Because that's a test question. Top left corner. Y'all need to remember that, top left corner. Okay. 1578, it moves to Turin, Italy, which is where it is today. And I wish we had more time. I always wish we had more time to talk about this story, but I mentioned it only briefly in passing. It was brought to Turin in 1578 because there had been a man, the incredible Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, who was a great champion for reform at the Reformed Council of Trent, who is responsible really for the modern concept of seminary education. And he his city of Milan had been spared from a plague, and he wanted to cross the Alps and go into Chambéry and venerate the Holy Shroud. And he was in such poor health that the Savoy family brought it to him. They met him in Turin with it. That man is St. Charles Borromeo. And one of the most beautiful artworks I curate is that scene of that day in October 1578 when they bring it to him in Turin, and the first Mass is celebrated there in its presence. So it's been there since 1578 is my point. So let's jump way forward to 1898, and the very first photograph of the Shroud was done by a lawyer, an amateur photographer by the name of Secunda Pia, who approached the Savoy family and asked for permission to photograph the Shroud, and of course they said yes. Photography had only been around, maybe 5 decades if you stretch it into the 1840s. What we think of photography anyway had been around since a few decades at this point in time. And they gave him permission, and so he took what, of course, would have been a very prolonged exposure on about a 12-inch glass plate. I'm looking at the young people in here, I'm going, I know you have no clue what I'm talking about. Zero. You should have seen me trying to explain this to 40,000 English-speaking youth at World Youth Day. Finally, a young man from Colombia came to me and said, let me show you the setting on my iPhone that will do that. It's called classic invert. I learned something every day, but that was great. So most of us, or a lot of us, looking around the room, a lot of us remember that we would take our film to the Doug's drugstore or wherever and have it processed, right? And you would get back your prints, which is the positive image, and then you had a strip of negatives. So this is a very primitive early version of that, where the negative image is actually processed on a glass plate. And Secunda Pia walked into his darkroom to process the very first photograph that was ever taken of this cloth. But before we talk about that, I want you to just for a moment consider the perspective of a medieval pilgrim. Somebody who would have never seen what we know, who would never, certainly not only not have seen what we see today, but would have never known the intricacies of the science and the forensics that we know, but someone in authority. This is how the medieval mind worked. You young people over here, y'all need to listen to this. This is important. Okay. Because before the Enlightenment, people actually had some concept of authority. Yeah? And I'm sorry, was that a commentary? I think it was. But the medieval mind would have simply accepted whatever someone in authority told them. If it was their bishop, it was their parish priest, whoever it was, but someone would have said to them, this is the burial linen of Christ. And think about, a church even like this beautiful cathedral. The pilgrims would come in on their hands and knees and crawl down the entire nave of this church, or something larger even, to drop and venerate the linen that they saw only what you see here. It's all they ever would have seen. But yet, they believed because someone in authority had told them. So I've always found this interesting, and I was joking about the Enlightenment, although not really, because with the age of the Enlightenment and what we live in today is the postmodern world, we don't think that way anymore. Our question is no longer by what authority do you say that. Our question today is, if I came in here and told you that the earth revolves around the sun, which I hope you know, then the question would be, where is your evidence and where is your proof? Do you see the difference? Prove it to me. So isn't it interesting that at the beginning of the 20th century, when we are entering this great postmodern age, the great age of even like post-skepticism, we are more skeptical than we've ever been about natural or supernatural phenomena. Isn't it interesting that this is when we get an image? An image. Show me. Where is your evidence? Where is your proof? So when Secunda Pia goes into his darkroom to process this plate, he's the very first one to ever see this. He was, initially at least, accused of having created a hoax, because this is actually the inverse of the way photography works. What you are now looking at here in the photographic negative is the positive image of the man. You see, when you look at the shroud with your naked eye, just as its natural image, as we would call it, you're looking at a negative image. The shroud itself is a negative image. So when you take a negative of a negative, what do you get? A positive. Nothing else in the world photographs this way. You are now looking at the positive image of the man as if he's standing here before you, and that nail wound, the only nail wound that's truly visible in this image, is in his left hand. Right? Can everybody see that? His left wrist. So it was 33 years before the Savoy family allowed the shroud to be photographed a second time, and every photographer ever since has gotten the exact same result. Now, what you are looking at here is stunning detail. And when I mentioned in the beginning anatomically perfect and forensically accurate, we can super magnify, use extreme magnification of imaging and look at every single one of these wounds and see the staggering detail of them. It's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing. All right, so fast forward now to later in the 20th century, 1976, there's a physicist working with the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Dr. John Jackson, a nuclear physicist, by the way, who was working to help develop technology that would allow imaging that was coming back from satellites, photographs. Let's say that you've got a photograph of the moon, and you're looking at kind of this one-dimensional, and this flat image, and you don't know if you're looking at a crater, you don't know if you're looking at a mountain, you don't know if that image has any dimension to it. Does that make sense? So he was working with them to develop some technology, and I use the word technology very loosely, because I actually have a working VP8 analyzer in Shreveport that I can't get the cables for anymore. But anyway, I use the word technology loosely. This was analog. It's very simple, really. But what it did was it took photographs and read them for dimension. Okay? So Dr. Jackson had the idea of taking a photograph of the shroud, because they were running lots of photographs as tests through this, reading things for dimension that were known to not have dimension, for instance, as a trial. So he took a photograph of the shroud and ran it through this analyzer, and when he did, he looked at every single person in the room and said, "We are taking a team of scientists to Turin." Because you see, Dr. Jackson already knew the photographic image quality that made it so unusual. That's why he wanted to do this. And when they ran that photograph of the shroud through this VP8 analyzer, they got this. It's a perfect three-dimensional relief of a real human man. And that's not the most of it. This would have been enough. This would have been enough. If I could stand here before you and say, guys, there's a three-dimensional map of this man that's embedded in the top fibrils of this linen, that would have been enough to blow your mind. Let me give you the rest of that. There is a direct, proportional relationship between the distance the cloth was from the body and the density of the image. So in other words, the places where the shroud actually touched the human form in it, like came in direct contact, the nose, the knees, the hands, okay? The image is proportionately more dense. It's darker there than it is in places where it didn't touch the body. For instance, the back of the knees. But the image is still there. It's just proportional to its distance from the body. Does that make sense to everybody? In other words, the spatial relationship that's embedded in this linen tells us exactly the position of this man when the image was formed. Again, nothing else analyzed produces or yields this kind of incredible, accurate data. So they did take a team of scientists to Turin, and it's because of these two things. There are two unique image characteristics that are unlike anything else ever photographed. The eye sees the photographic negative in the positive form, right? The natural form is actually a photographic negative. And there's three-dimensional spatial information embedded in the very top fibrils of the linen. So here is something else to put a footnote on the image. It is exactly, no matter where you are on the linen, no matter what part of the body or the spatial relationship distance from the body you are looking at, the image runs exactly 7 fibrils deep. Exactly 7 fibrils deep. Now, in case you're sitting there going, okay, I have no idea what a fibril is. Put in your mind a thread. Anybody got a thread in your mind? You're going to thread a needle? A thread has 100 fibers. Every fiber has 100 fibrils. This image is so superficial you could scrape it off with a razor blade. And yet it contains all of this incredibly stunning detail. 7 fibrils across the entire linen. Okay? So put a pin in that because we'll be coming back to that. So the age of science really begins in 1978 when they took this team of scientists to Turin. But before we do that, I want to stop for just a moment to remind us what science does. And I think that this is super important, maybe more important than when we're talking about the Shroud, because I frequently get a question that has always made me uncomfortable, and I'll share that with you at the end. If you don't ask the question and I say, that makes me uncomfortable. If I don't hear the question, somebody remind me to tell you what the question is that always makes me uncomfortable. What does science do? Science is a measure of the natural world. It measures natural phenomena. It's a great gift. It's a method. It's a method that when it is rigorously and objectively applied leads us to natural truth. Yeah? But it relies upon a method that is administered by human beings, and it relies upon a method that depends upon the objectivity of the scientist. And so I've said some key things here. It's a natural measure, and it relies upon objectivity. That's going to be important too, as you'll see, I think, soon enough. That's the 1978 research project. All of this great, incredible equipment they had in 2 18-wheelers is probably on one of their iPhones over here. You've got all this technology on your iPhone. I got an app for that, right? They've got something that will do this. But this is what they published. I mentioned to you that I was so pulled into this because this was published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, with the basic conclusion being, we cannot explain the image. There is no paint, there is no pigment, there is no dye of any kind on this cloth to account for that image. We can only tell you that there was a process, there's a real human form wrapped in this, and that some process actually caused a chemical change in the top 7 fibrils of the linen. There's a dehydration of those fibrils. In other words, whatever moisture is in those top fibrils is sucked out by whatever this event was, and it captured a naturally perfect, forensically accurate image of a real human being. And this man was crucified, okay? He was capped with thorns, something thorny on his head. There's between 75 to 100 puncture wounds, as I mentioned, on the top of the head, some of which bled very profusely. The one on the forehead here especially bled very profusely. You can see the piercing wound in the wrist. The other is hidden from our view. Right here, there is an upward gouge in the right side, the right thoracic cavity. It's right here between the 5th and 6th ribs. And thanks to CSI, have you ever watched the courtroom drama where the prosecutor shows up and says, here's the murder weapon? Ever watch that? And how do we know that's the murder weapon? Because it matches the wound. So we know the exact width, depth, and breadth of the weapon that caused the wound in this man's side. Anybody want to guess? It's a 1st century Roman lance. Okay? This man has 360 individual wounds on the body that are actually strikingly identical under extreme magnification. CSI, point, again, admissible in a court of law. This man was beaten with a very specific type of weapon. This weapon had 3 straps, and at the end of each of those straps were 2 metal balls of an irregular shape. So every time this man was struck, let's do the math, how many wounds did it leave every time he was struck? Look, I was a humanities major. This is basic math. I can do this. Right? 3 cords, 2 balls at the end of each thread, at the end of each cord. Very good. Okay, good. 6. This man has 360 of those individual wounds. Now, here's the second piece of the CSI information we know. Someone stood on this man's right and someone stood on his left. These 2 men each had the same weapon, and they were of differing heights because of the directionality of the wounds. So we know that one of the men who was beating him was taller than the other. The man who was being beaten had his hands, or perhaps even his forearms, tied together in front of him, and he was bent over when this happened to him. 360. So how many lashes did this man get? 60. Very good. Okay, y'all are so good. All right. Now, frequently, what I will get from people is, well, wait a minute. We've always been told 39 lashes. Right? You heard that before? If you're trying to tell me this is Jesus, that contradicts the story, because Jesus would have only gotten 39 lashes. People, 39 lashes might have been Jewish law, 40 minus 1. What makes anybody in this room think that that is Roman law? This man was struck 60 times with the same weapon from 2 men on both sides of his body. And these wounds come from his neck all the way down to the soles of his feet. So, again, under extreme magnification, we know that all these wounds are identical. Very important. The feet, which have been cut off in this image, but I'll show it to you in a moment. The feet were pierced with a large object as well. The feet were incredibly bloody in this image. And there's the body is in rigor mortis, which is a super important point too. I'll show you that in just a moment. All right, what you're looking at here is what we call a syndonic crucifix. There is there was a forensic, actually was a forensic expert who was also a priest, Monsignor Giulio Ricci in Rome. Now today there's a Ricci Center in Rome that's dedicated to him that studies the forensics of the Shroud. And he was very interested in taking only the information that he could learn forensically from the Shroud and placing it on a corpus that would depict the man in the Shroud, would depict him at the moment of death, the position of the body. Because you see, blood flow and blood spatter, which is good forensic science, CSI, right, courtroom drama, we can tell based on blood flow and blood spatter what the position of the body was. So we know that the man was hanging like this, which is not how we typically see a crucifix, is it? The right arm was at this angle because of the blood flow. The left arm was hyperextended, actually. It even looks as if the right arm, right shoulder, is somewhat perhaps dislocated because of the blood flow. So when I mentioned that the body was in rigor mortis, the reason that we know that is based on that three-dimensional mapping that came out of that 1976 analysis. Remember I told you the spatial relationship that exists? We can say, okay, the knee was this far from the cloth and the heel was this far from the cloth, and it's even completely across the linen. So the man's in rigor mortis, you can tell from his neck, from the flexion of the knees and the feet. This man's arms were pushed into this position. They were forced into this position. And again, that's something that we know from looking at the torsion of the musculature that's evident even in the image itself. You can tell there was some effort there to actually push his legs down, because there's a contact blood stain on the shroud that is from a wound on the back of the knee that lines up perfectly. Someone attempted to push the legs down and it just didn't stick. The body's in rigor mortis. So rigor mortis sets in maybe a few hours after death, sometimes more quickly, but resolves within about, I would say the outside of this would be about a 48-hour window. So, you know, if you want to think about it, if you're already kind of jumping ahead to the end of the story and thinking, oh my gosh, I wonder if this person could be Jesus of Nazareth. If you want to think about that particular scenario, remember that Jesus goes into a tomb on Friday afternoon. Saturday afternoon would have been 24 hours. Sunday afternoon would have been 48 hours. This image was formed within a 48-hour window because the body is still in rigor mortis at the time the image is captured. And I do mention it's a mirror of the Gospels. So hopefully you know what that means. If you read the Passion accounts, we're going to hear the Passion accounts next week. When you hear that, think about this cloth. Think about what all the wounds are in this linen that don't just mirror the Gospels, they actually amplify them for us. The Gospels tell us that Jesus was struck in the face. Yeah? It struck him in the face. Well, the shroud shows us that he's got a swollen cheekbone and an eye socket that's swollen. The Gospels tell us he was crowned with thorns. Well, the shroud actually amplifies that by telling us it wasn't some pretty little crown. It was a mass of thorns that was crammed onto his head, like a helmet. We're told that he was scourged, that Pilate ordered him to be scourged. We know the gospel amplified in the shroud tells us how many times he was struck and with what kind of weapon, how tall the men were who struck him. Do you get the picture? So it's not just a mirror of the Gospels, it's an amplification of it for us. The linen itself is super interesting. This is something I always say I'm going to talk about at a later time, and I never have developed this presentation yet, but I will one day. The linen itself is fascinating. It is a pure, incredibly expensive linen. It's a 3/1 herringbone weave, which is most unusual, no matter what its age. It is most unusual because it would have been a very fine cloth. Whoever owned this linen was someone of means. This is not something that someone ran out and bought on a Friday afternoon at the corner market. It is a very fine linen. And I have to tell you that when I saw it the first time, well, that's not true. The first time was quite emotional. The second time I saw the shroud, when I kind of had that moment where my academic mind kicked in, and I was like, okay, there's that water stain, there's that blood stain. You know, like it's like I'm classifying all this data I've had in my head all these years. And then I looked and realized right there before me, you can see this incredibly intricate, beautiful weave pattern. It's visible to the eye. It's a herringbone weave. It's absolutely beautiful. Expensive linen. And today, we know where that linen was grown. This is kind of new information. This just came out last year. I'm on the board, as Father mentioned when he introduced me, I'm on the board of an organization called the Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association, STERA for short. And it's actually a very, very important organization in that it was founded by the documenting photographer on that 1978 project, a man named Barry Schwartz, and who died last year. And he, as a member of that team, actually had samples of the shroud that had been taken, and he had apostolic authority from the Archbishop of Turin to have them. He kept them in a safe in Colorado Springs. And on the board of this organization, we would frequently get asked by people, well, what are you doing with those samples? Why don't you let somebody do something scientifically with them, right? Well, it never really seemed to present itself in a way that we thought would give us any information that we didn't already have. Until we were presented with a proposal 2 years ago that suggested that because of isotope testing, they could take the fiber samples from the shroud, since it's pure linen. They could take those samples and do isotope testing, get an isotope measurement that would give a geographic area that flax linen was grown. Does that follow? Everybody tracking with me? Ladies, how many times you've been to the store to buy those Egyptian cotton sheets? How do you know they're really Egyptian cotton? You can trust that. They can't say it if it's not. It's done with isotope testing. It gives them a specific geographic zone that cotton was grown. So I guess what I'm going to tell you is not going to surprise you very much. We know from that isotope testing done just last year, 2024, we know exactly where that flax was grown. Right here. The darker the red, the more likely its location. This is not a European linen. Everybody oriented to where this is? Y'all know your geography? Do y'all know your geography over here? Okay. You're shaking your head. You know where the Mediterranean Sea is? Yeah? Okay. There's that Egyptian cotton, ladies. It's right there. Right here is Israel. So my point is that no, this does not tell us when the flax was grown, but it tells us where it came from. This pure, beautiful linen was not grown in Europe, and therefore it's very unlikely to have been created in Europe. Does that make sense? Okay. So I just thought of something I need to go back and tell y'all. Forgive me for this, but I want to make a point about this, and I don't know why this just popped back in my head. So when I was at the National Eucharistic Congress this summer, we had a banner of this crucifix. The actual banner itself is in Monroe, Louisiana. I know. There's 5 of them in the world. There's 2 in Rome, 1 in Jerusalem, 1 in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which I haven't seen, but I've heard there's 1 there. And there's 1 in Monroe. Okay? And I know that because it's part of the collection that I helped curate with Father Peter Mangum. And when he moved to that parish, he took it with him. Okay? Took this Sindonic crucifix with him. So when I was at the Eucharistic Congress, I couldn't travel with this because it's made of fiberglass and it's life-size, and you see the challenges there, right? So I put it on a banner that I could pull up and stand in the room with the exhibit. And one afternoon, security came in, and we had actually had 10,000 people come through that exhibit in 4 days. And security came in and said, we're shutting down the exhibit because we have a special VIP who wants you to give him a private tour. And me, because I'm so kind and diplomatic at times, said, well, is it the Pope? I mean, like I'm closing down the exhibit, and you've got all these people standing in line? It better be the Pope. I'm joking about it, right? And he said, no, it's Jonathan Rumi, the guy that plays Jesus on The Chosen. I was like, well, I have to open it for Jesus, right? I have to let Jesus see his burial cloth. So anyway, Jonathan Rumi came in, and I had the great privilege of doing a private tour with him in the exhibit. And he got to that banner of the Ricci crucifix. And do you know how many times I've looked at this crucifix in the last 10 years? I mean, I used to pray before it daily. Daily. When it was at the cathedral in Shreveport. And he walked right up to it and said, oh, his right hand is raised in blessing. And I went, oh yeah, I knew that. I'd never seen it before. So anyway, I can't say too much about this except to tell you that that we are working with The Chosen right now in season 6, which is the crucifixion and resurrection, based on some forensic data that he was very impressed with. So I can't say more than that, but you know, I'm kind of a big deal. So okay, the blood on the shroud is human. It is type AB and it is male. All that we know very well. There's a sort of an interesting DNA preliminary. This is what I'm going to say is speculative still because it's being peer reviewed. Remember I told you I was going to say that. It's being peer reviewed, so this is not necessarily category 1. There's not a broad consensus on this yet. But if I'd been here 10 years ago, I couldn't have told you it was type AB male. So I can tell you that today. What is emerging is, and people always want to know, well, what is the DNA telling us? You know, what do we know about the man of the shroud and his DNA? The DNA is actually, the blood is so denigrated, it's so old that it's hard to get enough to amplify it to get a DNA profile until recently. And what is emerging is a profile that is incomplete. We are getting information, preliminary information, on mitochondrial DNA, which is only given to a subject by his mother. I'm just going to leave that. Mic drop. Okay. This makes the shroud a forensic match for another cloth, by the way. The blood spatter, blood flow, and blood type, type AB, makes it a forensic match for another cloth that's held in Oviedo, Spain. So, everybody, this is your homework. I want you to go home and read. We're going to hear it a couple weeks. But go home and read chapter 20 of the Gospel of John. Everybody going to do that for me? Because John is the only one who gives us some important detail that's shroud related. I mean, think about Peter and John. They're the first shroud experts, right? They're the first ones. Think about when you read John's Gospel 20, don't think about what John doesn't say is there. This has always been very interesting to me. This is the resurrection narrative. John never says what is not in the tomb. Okay, read this and pay attention. He doesn't say, I bent down, right, like the disciple Jesus loved bent down and looked in. Remember, he let Peter run in first, and then the other disciple bent down and looked in the tomb. He doesn't say the body's gone. He doesn't say Jesus is missing. He says, we saw the burial linen lying there, including the cloth that had covered Jesus' face that was rolled up in a separate place by itself. John is the only one who describes that sudarium. That's the word in Greek he uses, is a sudarium, which is sweat cloth. Every man who worked outside had one. When Jesus would have been deposed from the cross, someone immediately covered his face. Immediately. Soaking up the blood and probably the clear fluid draining that had drained from his nose and his mouth. And now that is blood, has blood and body fluid on it, it is part of the body under Jewish law. It had to go in the tomb. John is the only one to give us that detail. I have a theory about why John's the only one to mention it, but I'll save that for another time. Sudarium. This cloth, interestingly, that's in Oviedo, Spain, shows up in the year 614. It's entered into the inventory of a religious community there, and they enter it, this is exactly what they say. Ancient reliquary belonging to the Apostle James contains a bloody cloth. The year 614. We know where this linen's been every day since 614. There are over 50 points of forensic congruity, blood spatter, blood flow, blood type, AB, between the Shroud of Turin and this cloth in Oviedo, Spain, which is more than double what you need to admit in a court of law that these cloths covered the face of the same man. So if they covered the face of the same man, this would be important in that we know where this cloth has been every day since when? 614. So if they came into contact with the same person When did that have to happen? Before 614. Exactly. So that's very interesting. There's more and more attention being brought to bear on this particular cloth as well, being a forensic match. There's actually a blood stain right here. You can see it. That is identical. If you look at this microscopically, there's one on the back of the shroud that lines up perfectly. It's a perfect match. Now, AB blood. This is fascinating to me. AB. We don't know the type. If it's AB negative, that's less than 1% of the population. If it's AB positive, that's 3 to 5% of the population that have that. It's the rarest blood type. Okay, so I'm guessing, can we guess there's maybe, 200 people here? What do y'all think? What do you guys think in the back? Maybe 200? 250? Okay, let's go with 200. It'll make my math work better. Huh? 200? Yeah. 200 people. Okay, so if it were type AB, let's just say type AB, we'd be talking about in 100 people, there would be 3 of you who had type AB. If there's 200 of you, there's 6 people who have type AB. So who are my people who have type AB? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, that's okay. Or you don't know. Okay. I'm just going with it because I don't know what my blood type is, right? Now, imagine that what are the odds that these 2 linens would be an exact match for that blood type? And then what are the odds that it would match every single forensically studied Eucharistic miracle in the world? What are the odds? It has 10 zeros behind it. And again, I'm a humanities major, so I can't tell you what that means. But I know that the odds are really astronomical, that it would be anybody else. 56 pollens that are unique. 7 are unique to the Middle East. 3 of the pollens are only found in one place in the world together, which is in Jerusalem. I'm going to show you a slide that has a timeline on it, but don't pay so much attention to the timeline as to the geography. I'm going to show you every place the shroud has been. And what I have done is I have assigned a time to it based on my own historical hypothesis, okay? Which would be a whole other presentation. Or we can stay until, 11 or 12 o'clock tonight. But this shroud has been in Jerusalem. It has been in Antioch. It has been in this part of the Anatolian Peninsula. There's a very specific pollen that places it here. It has been at the straits going into the Black Sea at Constantinople because, again, a very specific pollen places it there. It has been in these places in Western Europe, which aligns perfectly with the known historical record. What does not align with the known historical record is its journey to these places. Do you see? I can't tell you with certainty when that linen was in Edessa, Turkey, but I can tell you that it was. I can tell you that it was in Antioch. And isn't it interesting that St. Athanasius of Alexandria in the 4th century reports a tradition that there was an image of our Lord at full length that was taken from Jerusalem to Antioch when the city of Jerusalem fell. Okay, I digress. My point is, scientifically, forensically, we know a lot about its journey. The soil is a very specific type of limestone that was actually vacuumed off the shroud. You heard that right, vacuumed off the shroud. They put it in a Ziploc bag in 1978 and wrote on the outside of the Ziploc, labeled it dirt. Because no one knew. We didn't know until about 15 years ago what kind of dirt it is, what kind of dirt it really is. It's a limestone. We knew that first. Okay, it's a limestone. Limestone is very common. No, it's a very specific limestone. It's travertine aragonite, which is common to the Mediterranean world. But, like in North Louisiana, I don't think y'all have this problem down here, but in North Louisiana, we have this really thick red clay. It's beautiful for making pottery. And Georgia's very famous for their red clay too. But if you look at North Louisiana red clay and Georgia red clay, microscopically, they look very different. Even though if you're looking at them with your eye, they look almost identical, yeah? Same is true of limestone. So what I'm saying is it has a unique microscopic crystalline signature to it that will tell you where it came from. This travertine aragonite, the closest match for it, and this travertine was found at the feet, the knees, and the bridge of the nose and the eyes, because whoever this man was, face planted. There's large deposits of dirt, soil around the eye sockets and in the hairline. And that travertine aragonite, the match for it, the signature for it, was actually found at the Damascus Gate in the old city of Jerusalem. So again, at some point in its history, this cloth was in Jerusalem. Now this is the photograph taken in 1988 when they published the carbon-14 dating results. Everybody see that right there? 1260 to 1390. Students, are y'all looking at this over here? I keep checking in with y'all to make sure you're still with me. Okay, good. We need to talk after. I need every single one of your names. I'll make sure you get extra credit. 1260 to 1390. University of Oxford, University of Zurich, University of Arizona in the United States were given the opportunity to carbon-14 date the shroud. This was the protocol. They would take 6 samples of the linen from across the linen in different places. Each laboratory would get 2 samples. And they would come together and publish their results. And this is that day. Does anybody notice anything on the blackboard? An exclamation point. Now, I've already confessed that I was a humanities major. But is this some scientific notation that I didn't know about? Do you remember my point about what science does and how science behaves? Science is a method that measures natural phenomena. It informs us about our natural world, and it's a rigorous method that demands the objectivity of the scientist. What is objective about an exclamation point behind a medieval date at a press conference? I never liked this photograph. And what happened is that in 2019, a young French lawyer by the name of Tristan Casabianca called up the British Museum, because they're the curators, they're the custodians of all the raw data that was taken from that 1988 test. Tristan said, I want to see the data. I want to see for myself what the protocol was, where the sampling method was, how the sampling method was carried out, who received which samples. And the British Museum told him no. So he did what lawyers do. Got lawyers here? What would you do? Sued him. Yeah, he sued the British Museum under the International Freedom of Information Act and forced them to release the raw data. And it is an indictment, not just of the 3 universities that are involved, but of their entire protocol, because this is what they did. How many of you remember that the protocol was they would take 6 samples from across the linen? Each laboratory would test 2 samples. Okay. So what they did is they took 1 sample and they cut it into 6 pieces, which even I know is not the same thing as taking 6 samples. University of Arizona still has a sample in their safe they never tested. And here's the test question. Where did they cut that sample from? Y'all were paying attention. The very part of the linen that every person knew in 1988 was chemically different than the entire rest of the cloth. You had 14 and a half feet. And you took 1 sample from the top left corner because they knew they would get a medieval result. They knew they would. They knew it. So, Tristan Casabianca published it, and to their credit, the journal he published in, Archaeometry, that's Oxford University's publication. They kind of fell on their sword. They fell far short of saying, I'm sorry, but they published it. And so what we're doing today, and some of this is now being peer reviewed, this is emerging science, but it is getting good peer review, There are two environmental dating methods that have been developed in Italy, one of them at the University of Padua and one of them at the Italian National Research Council. And we are looking at the very real possibility that we are talking about a first century date. University of Padua is consistently getting about a 600-year window. Can't really get it any more narrow than that, although 2022 narrowed the window a little bit. The Italian National Research Council, this is all I know about this wide-angle X-ray scattering. I've told you everything I know, okay? But what they have published in 2021, and it made the news media again last year for some reason, I'm not sure why, it made the news cycles again, they're getting a first century date, okay? So this is going to continue to be refined. We're very hopeful there will be non-destructive methods that can do this because the Shroud, at least according to the last 3 popes, will never be carbon-14 dated again. It's destructive, and why introduce more controversy when you've already done the test and now you're going to repeat it? If you get a different date, you've already introduced controversy, yeah? So the Pope has said no to that. So we're looking to non-destructive methods to do that. The image formation is what we really cannot explain. That's the big mystery, isn't it? The big mystery. There's that word again. I wanted to close with that word mystery. The big mystery is how the image got there, because there's these image characteristics that have to be matched if you're going to say that you created it. If you're going to say, I've had people come up to me and say, oh, I could do that in my microwave. Okay. Or I could do that with an atomic bomb. Well, please don't. But if you think you can recreate all of these image characteristics that have to be matched, there is $1 million award for you, a private citizen in the United Kingdom will give to you, and he will even give you the 3 pieces of linen to try. That offer has been out there for a decade, and nobody has done it because of the complexity of the image. And to explain it, we have no scientific recourse. There's no natural process in science that will produce this. So we are left with something that is theoretical. We're in the realm of the theoretical. In other words, we can't do it in a laboratory, but we can tell you what process likely did this, because we know there's a chemical reaction in the very top fibrils of the linen. The only thing that would do that and not destroy the cloth is a light of such an intensity that it did not burn, and it is not heat, because it's not a scorch. It didn't destroy the linen. But an intensity of about 784 trillion watts, which is enough to power Manhattan Island for a year, that happened in an immeasurable millisecond and changed the chemical structure of the top 7, and I don't know if I keep saying 7, there must be some symbolism to 7, the top 7 fibrils of that linen captured in perfect anatomic precision the man who was wrapped within it. So, theoretical physics leaves us with this. The body in the linen became mechanically transparent, pure light, in a millisecond. And because that body now has the form of the man, but none of its mass, the cloth, remember how it was wrapped? Remember, y'all get that image in your mind? The cloth simply collapsed through that mechanically transparent body along the plane of gravity and captured all the detail of both sides of that man. That's the only thing that explains all of the image characteristics. Now, can we test this in a laboratory? Anybody been mechanically transparent lately and want to volunteer for this experiment? We can't do it. We can't do it. There are people out there who have come up with hypotheses and tested them, and they can match 2 or 3 of these characteristics. Nothing matches all of them except this theoretical physics explanation of pure light. Pure light. Now, the reason I'm especially interested in light is that Barry Schwartz, the photographer I mentioned, God rest his soul, when he photographed the Shroud in 1978, and he was Jewish. He was Jewish till the day he died, actually, and he never converted. He didn't see the need to, but he believed the man in the shroud was Jesus. He said, yeah, he's a Jew like me. He used to say that all the time. When he went to Turin in 1978, he tells the story that he expected to walk up to the Shroud, take out his loupe, look at it, he'd see the brush marks, or he would see some indication of some man-made contrivance, and he would walk away, collect his check, free trip to Italy, and go home. He died last year, still studying the Shroud, running the largest website, Shroud.com, on the web about the Shroud in the world. And he had an idea of taking the Shroud when they brought it to him, turning it on its side, and putting light behind it to shine light through it, transmitted light through it. And in his photograph, what you see is that the image disappears. Not the matter, not the physical matter. You see, the burn marks are still there. Those scorches are still there. The blood is still there. That is matter. What do you not see? The image. And I never will forget the day I was having a phone conversation with him about this very thing, because I've always been interested kind of in this is for a different day, but the duality of light itself. I mean, light has a dual nature. Don't you find that fascinating? Light is both particle and wave, dual nature, just like Christ. Just like the light coming into the world. So I was fascinated by this, and I said to Barry, this is something I really want to explore more, and he just stopped me. He said, Cheryl, the only thing that disappears in light is light itself. So, what we come to, I say the greatest unsolved mystery, we're really only dealing with two possible outcomes to our question. It's either the authentic burial cloth of Christ, and this is some type of a physical remain of a metaphysical event, a natural remain of a supernatural event, and it's some process we don't understand and we can't reproduce, okay? It is either that, or the only other thing that it can be, and there's really only one other thing it can be, is it would have to be an ancient or medieval artwork. And if it is an ancient or medieval artwork, again, it's an image formation process that we cannot reproduce in the 21st century, that the ancient world or the medieval world would have known and that we cannot recreate. But the artist who did this, because if it's man-made, it's an artist, the artist who did this would have to be someone who had advanced knowledge of botany, human anatomy, blood spatter forensics, and negative photography. It is one of these two things. So where we've reached tonight, and this is, again, my second commercial plug is about the book. Where we've reached tonight is what I like to call the limits of human knowledge. I'm very interested, after all these years of having studied the Shroud and spoken to people and had fielded every kind of question you can imagine, I'm often struck by the same question in my own mind: how much do you need? How much information would it take for any of you to come to the conclusion of which of these it is? What does it take? So here's the way I would frame it philosophically for you. When you have confronted the limit of what your human capacity is to understand a phenomenon, you are in the presence of mystery. Can we agree with that? It's a mystery. When you confront that question that you don't have the answer to in your head, where reason cannot lead you, science cannot take you past the threshold of the natural measure that it is, you're in mystery. And when you are in mystery, whatever you call it, whoever you believe this person is, when you're in mystery, you're already in the presence of something greater than yourself. And then it is not your head, but your heart that has to make the leap. Yes? Thank you very much for listening to me tonight. I'm sorry, there's the third commercial. Father, do we have time for a couple of questions or no? Where'd Father go? Are running away? We do? Okay. Just a few. Look for a new documentary coming out. It says Holy Week on here. It's probably going to be during Easter season on EWTN with me and Father Peter Mangum and Father Robert Spitzer. Some of you might know him from EWTN. A new documentary on the Shroud. I have that podcast if you're interested. And then my friend Father Andrew Dalton in Rome has a great Pints with Aquinas episode. Questions of any kind? Yes.
You very briefly mentioned mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that study?
I'll tell you what I know. That what is being amplified from the blood to get a DNA profile is only yielding mitochondrial DNA, which is produced by the mother. Gives us genetic information about the mother only. That's all we know. That's all we're beginning to know. Yeah. Nothing from a biological father. Yes. 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 That his hand was raised in blessing. His right arm was raised in blessing. Yeah, blessing. Yeah. Like a priestly blessing from the cross at the moment of death. He went on to expound on that, that. Yes. The question was about the crucifix, that what the comment was I made about the hand, that Jonathan Rumi actually is the one who pointed out that the hand appeared to be raised in blessing. Blessing. Yeah. Yes, sir, way back there.
What a beautiful name. This is one of
Is there a photograph of...
I just said
No. Does the head covering have the negative image on it? No. Because the head covering would have been removed before the body was enshrouded. As John describes it, it was rolled up in a separate place by itself. No, it has no image on it. There's no image on it. Yes. Well, first of all, it's not at the Vatican. So the question was about whether there's something from the Vatican saying it will never leave. It is not at the Vatican. It's at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin. It can never leave Turin, and it belongs to the Pope as an individual.
But you will always have it.
Yes, that was the terms of its transfer from the Savoy family to the Pope. Yes, way back there. You have to be loud because I'm like deaf. I listened to too much loud music in the 80s.
I've always wondered, why are there so few babies? And why would it be? I know babies deliver so fast.
I don't know. Do we have any hematologists in here? By any chance? As I understand it, it's a distribution of blood types, right? AB just happens to be the rarest type. I have the second rarest type. I have B blood, which is the second rarest. So it's just a matter of distribution across populations. I think the significance of AB, if you're going to try to draw some sort of a theological parallel, is that AB is the universal recipient, receives all. Yes. No. There are no paints, pigments, or dyes. There's nothing to account for the image except the chemical process that produced it. Way back there, pink, yes. What is the counter argument for this not being? Okay, That's a great question. So what is the counter argument for this not being the burial linen of Christ? I have actually had people say to me after presentations, when I have left those two possibilities, and those are the only two possibilities, that's the counter argument, is it's an artwork. I've had people say to me, it is easier to believe that it's a medieval artwork than to believe it's the burial linen of Christ. Okay, and so let me tell you my experience with that. And this is why I was so interested, as I said, in writing this book, which probably 6 people will read because it's going to be, boring. But what I'm so interested in is what does it take? We live in this great age of science, this great age of inquiry. We are able to understand natural phenomena more than we ever have in our history. And that person who comes to me, and I've seen it many times, who comes to me as a skeptic, and I've even had him be hostile, but that's okay. Because I even remember being in, where was I when this happened? Oh, I was in Alabama. I was in Birmingham, Alabama. And I got this question, and actually it was, what the person said to me was this, all these different reasons it couldn't be. That he was too tall to be a first century Jew. And I shut that down. He's actually too tall to be a European medieval man. Not too tall to be a first century Jew. He's probably average side of tall, maybe. And then, throwed all this stuff at me. Like, I could do this in my microwave. We've done this with camera obscura in the Middle Ages. All these ridiculous things. Leonardo da Vinci created it. Well, okay, Leonardo da Vinci was gifted, but this was around 100 years before he was born, so he's probably not that gifted. And all these things he threw at me, and finally I looked at him and I said, why are you here? It's 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, and you came to listen to a talk about something you don't believe in? Because you see, guys, here's the thing. In the skeptic's heart, what they have just confronted is an uncomfortable dissonance. The realization that they're so empirically minded that they need the evidence, they need the proof, and now they have it, and now what do I do with it? It is a dissonance in the soul that you have to confront. And so I welcome that because I see that as an inquiring, discerning soul. Yeah, it is. We all got a little bit of Thomas in us. Come on, you're all here tonight. We all got a little bit of Thomas in us. Or you wouldn't care. So somebody asked me not long ago, well, what if somebody proves that they got some process they figured out they can do this, and somebody picks up that $1 million prize in Britain? What changes? What are you going to do? And I'm like, well, the only thing that's going to change for me is my travel schedule. It does not change my belief in the resurrection. I don't need this to be real to believe in the resurrection. But isn't it interesting that we got this image in the most skeptical age of human history? He meets us where we are. Yes. Yes. That's a great question. Can there be isotope testing done on the blood? Not that I'm aware of. But they can do what I've learned recently that I think is on the horizon. What they can do is actually carbon date some of the pollen samples, which is going to be very helpful. Except, again, it's a destructive process. Okay, question over here. You've been so patient. It's in Oviedo, Spain. It showed up there, and it actually came out of Jerusalem in advance of the Persian invasions in the 7th century. A lot of relics left the Holy Land in advance of the Persian invasions of the 7th century. So it was brought into northern Spain. There's a beautiful tradition, devotion there to Santiago, to James. And so it was in a reliquary purported to have belonged to the Apostle James, is why it shows up in northern Spain. Because there's that great devotion to him there. Yes? Veronica's veil, does it offer any complementary evidence to this? No. No. Veronica's veil. Okay, so you know that is not biblical. Yes, first of all, I'll establish that. It's not biblical. That's a beautiful part of our tradition. It's our way of the cross. It's in our way of the cross that we remember that moment when Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. That name, remember, Veronica means true icon. Her name means true icon. So we have an image that's in the Vatican. It's a beautiful devotion, but that image is nothing like this. Nothing. Yes. The uncomfortable question. So I have people ask me, thank you for that. So I have people who say to me, don't you think, going to the other extreme, don't you think that the shroud proves the resurrection? That is an uncomfortable question. Do y'all know why? What does science do? Science measures what? Natural phenomena. If a man went into a tomb on a Friday afternoon and he's out walking around on a Sunday, that is no natural event. What you are asking science, therefore, to do is to do something science cannot do. Science does not extend into supernatural questions. It can't possibly. One more question, yes?
The way that the shroud comes over like it does.
Yes.
Why is it that way? Is it a cultural thing?
Yeah, great question. So the question was about why is the shroud that way? Like, is that a cultural thing that would have been wrapped that way? From our study of actually ancient linen remains we found near the Dead Sea, for instance, up at Masada, the Dead Sea, there have been some studies done of this. There's actually two ways of the Jews would have enshrouded bodies. One of them is the way that appears to be described in the Gospels about Lazarus, that he was wrapped in strips, yeah? That's one way. The other way is to wrap in a single piece of linen, which is what the Gospels tell us, that Joseph of Arimathea, remember, went and asked Pilate for Jesus' body and then wrapped him in a pure piece of linen. So, if Joseph of Arimathea, a good, rich, observant Jew, already owned a tomb, whose shroud is this? Yeah, he might have got the tomb back, but he didn't get this back. Right? He didn't get the shroud back. Guys, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate you. I don't know. Oh, there he is. Okay. He is. He just appeared in white, dazzling white robes.
Like a light.
Like the Transfiguration.
So, a word of thanks to Dr. White for coming to do this presentation. This is in addition to her work on the Shroud and her teaching at LSUS and her family life and all the other things. So we're very grateful that she took the time to do this. Again, it's the second time I've seen it. I will be at it a third time when you come back. Not if, but when you come back.
All right.
This is an event that is hosted by the Cathedral and Wisdom. And we did that because I wanted to make Molly do all the real work. And secondly, so thank you, Molly, for getting this organized. And secondly, because every Monday at Wisdom we have what we call Behold. It's an opportunity for exposition of the Blessed Sacrament for adoration, and we have confessions available whenever it's a priest that does it. So we will have an hour of adoration immediately following as soon as we can get set up. And I will be in the confessional to the right side, and you're looking at the back of the church, hearing confessions if you would like to go to confession.
Test 1 2.
It's probably fine.
Because I think you should have it, but if you don't,
Let me look.
I don't.
Test 1
I
2.
don't.
Okay.
I've actually got it saved on my computer. So.
Okay. Okay. I'll email you. Yes. Yes. And our accountant has a stomach virus, so I told her that I'd rather not have the virus and you mail you the check.
That's fine.
Salutoi socia, quae celi pandis osiu, bella praemun auxilia, darobe fer auxilium, unitrinoque Domino, si sempiterna gloria, qui vitam sine termino, nobis donet in patria. Amen. Are you hurting and broken within? Overwhelmed by the weight of your sin? Jesus is calling. Have you come to the end of yourself? Do you thirst for a drink from the well? Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Leave behind your regrets and mistakes. Come today, there's no reason to wait. Jesus is calling. Bring your sorrows and trade them for joy. From the ashes a new life is born. Jesus is calling. Oh, come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Oh, what a Savior! Isn't He wonderful? Sing hallelujah! Christ is risen. Bow down before Him, for He is Lord of all. Sing hallelujah! Jesus cry, oh come to the altar. The Father's arms are open wide. Forgiveness was bought with the precious blood of Jesus Christ. Bear your cross as you wait for the crown. Tell the world of the treasure you found.